Good afternoon. My name is Father Pius Pietrek, and as I think most of you know, I serve as the Vice Chair of the Board of the Legal Services Corporation. I think our theme for today has been storytelling. It's a little bit of story time with LSC, so I hope you don't mind if I tell a little story. When I was first on the board, one of our first initiatives was to appoint a new president. We had an interim president at the time, and I was in my little office in my little parish in rural Ohio, in Zanesville, Ohio, and I get a very excited call from John Levy, our board chair. And I know you're asking yourself, how is an excited call from John Levy different from every other call from John Levy? More excited. And he was very excited because he had found a wonderful candidate for president, a great guy. We've got him. I want you to talk to him. Even after a year, I was a little skeptical about John's overexcitement every once in a while. But nonetheless, I was able to talk to this candidate that he had decided would be wonderful for us. And I had a little bit of a discussion with the man we would eventually hire, Jim Sandman. And I remember what sticks in my mind is one part of that conversation in particular. Because Jim, in our conversations, expressed a bit of surprise to me that when he had come to the LSC headquarters and walked around, he saw on the walls lots of pictures. Pictures of congressmen and senators, of presidents and federal officials. What he didn't see were any pictures of poor people, of our clients, of the people we served. He thought that was very strange. I thought that was very strange too, but what I thought was right was him thinking it's strange, and I remember thinking to myself, John was right. We've got our man. Because anybody who would say to themselves that the first thing that we need to keep in front of us is the face of the people that we serve, those who are poor and without resources, who are in need of an advocate for justice, is the right man to lead LSC. And whatever else I've done on my now almost 14 years on the LSC board, 2 votes I am most proud of. The first was to approve Jim Sandman as our president, and the second was to approve his successor, Ron Flagg, as our president. Now, as many of you know, before joining us, Jim Sandman had a 30-year career with Arnold & Porter and was the firm's managing partner. That aside, then he worked as general counsel for DC's public school before coming to us at LSC. Since leaving us, he has served as the distinguished lecturer and senior consultant to the Future of the Profession Initiative, say that real quickly, at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School, and he's the current vice chair of the DC Access to Justice Commission. It is my very, very great pleasure to welcome once again Jim Sandman to the Legal Services Corporation and to offer us his presentation. Thank you, Jim.
Good afternoon. We celebrate today the realization of a vision that once both audacious and firmly rooted in the most important and foundational of our nation's values. The vision was the creation of a federally funded nationwide network of community-based legal aid organizations to provide access to justice for low-income people. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were only 3 legal aid organizations in the United States, one in New York, one in New Jersey, and one in Chicago. There is no truth to the urban legend that it was John Levy who in 1888 founded what was called the Bureau of Justice in Chicago. But I understand why the rumor persists. Legal aid organizations proliferated over the next 6 decades, but their growing numbers did not capture the severe limitations on their reach. According to Earl Johnson's definitive history of legal aid in the United States, 40% of legal aid societies in the early 1960s did not have a single paid staff member. They depended entirely on volunteers. Others had only one part-time attorney or 2. Legal aid was largely an urban phenomenon. Large parts of the country had no legal aid organization of any kind, and funding for legal aid came entirely from private philanthropy. Legal aid was charity. Then came the vision. It originated with two Yale Law School graduates, Edgar Kahn and Jean Camper Kahn. They published an article in the Yale Law Journal in 1964 advocating for the creation of a nationwide network of community legal services offices. A pre-publication copy of their article came to the attention of Sargent Shriver, then head of the federal government's Office of Economic Opportunity. Shriver stayed up until 2 a.m. reading the article. It was like Columbus discovering America, Shriver said, an exciting thing for me to discover, something that captured my mind and my imagination. Shriver decided he wanted to make legal services a component of the Office of Economic Opportunity. But there was a problem. The prospect of a federally funded national legal aid program alarmed some components of the bar. Edgar and Jean Kahn, now working with Shriver, wisely engaged with the leadership of the American Bar Association and advocated for their vision. The ABA president, Lewis Powell, later a Supreme Court justice, was convinced of the merit of their program and led the campaign for its endorsement in the ABA House of Delegates. Powell personally drafted the resolution of support presented to the House of Delegates. Because of his towering professional stature and his masterful lobbying, the resolution passed on a voice vote without debate, unanimously. That resolution is regarded as one of the most important in the ABA's history. With the ABA's support, the first federally funded legal services program was created in 1965. Ever since then, year in and year out, the American Bar Association has been our country's most important, most stalwart, and most effective advocate for federal funding of civil legal aid. The Office of Economic Opportunity's Legal Services Network expanded in the late 1960s and early 1970s. A bipartisan congressional group recognized the desirability of institutionalizing federal support for legal services in an independent corporate entity funded by Congress, with a bipartisan board to be appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Their work led to the enactment of the Legal Services Corporation Act in 1974. The Act's first section, the Congressional Findings and Statement of Purpose, marked a revolution in the status of legal aid in the United States. Congress stated that there is a need to provide equal access to the system of justice in our nation for individuals who seek redress of grievances, that there is a need to provide high-quality legal assistance to those who would otherwise be unable to afford adequate access to legal counsel, and that providing legal assistance to those who face an economic barrier to adequate legal counsel will best serve the ends of justice. The consequences of these pronouncements were profound. Congress was, for the first time, recognizing the provision of legal services to low-income people as an important government function to serve the ends of justice. Legal aid was not charity. Congress's explicit endorsement of the federal government's responsibility for providing access to justice may have appeared novel. It was anything but. I believe the enactment of the Legal Services Corporation Act was deeply grounded in what the founders of our country and the framers of our national government emphasized over and over again was their first and most important goal: justice. James Madison wrote in Federalist Number 51, "Justice is the end of government. It is the end of civil society. It ever has been and ever will be pursued until it be obtained, or until liberty be lost in the pursuit." Thomas Jefferson wrote, "The most sacred of the duties of government is to do equal and impartial justice to all its citizens." Alexander Hamilton wrote, "The first duty of society is justice." The very first line of the Constitution cites establishing justice as a core purpose of our national government. The idea behind the Legal Services Corporation Act was not radical. It was a homecoming. The Act has stimulated three transformational results over the past 50 years. First, it has changed the national landscape of legal aid. Sustained federal funding has brought legal aid far beyond urban centers to all corners of the country, including rural areas and the American territories. Today's map of legal aid offices funded by LSC bears no resemblance to the bleak picture Earl Johnson described before federal funding. Because of the Legal Services Corporation Act, legal aid is now truly national. Second, federal funding demonstrated the societal value of legal aid, the return on investment, so effectively that it has stimulated hundreds of millions of dollars annually in additional legal aid funding from state and local governments. Before the Legal Services Corporation Act, state and local funding for legal aid was unheard of. But in significant part because of the example of the federal government and the results achieved by the legal aid programs funded by LSC, state and local governments across the United States are now the second largest source of funding for LSC grantees, more than $400 million per year at the last accounting. The brilliance of the vision we celebrate today has been embraced and propagated by all levels of government. Not everywhere yet, but stay tuned. And third, with now 50 or more years of service to their communities, LSC grantees have become community pillars. They are deeply integrated into their communities, not merely accepted, but embraced and beloved. They are partners with public health clinics, veteran centers, domestic violence shelters, social services organizations, local government agencies, homeless shelters, public libraries, courts, local bar associations, and churches, synagogues, and mosques. It wasn't always this way. In the early days of federally funded legal aid lawyers not infrequently found themselves shunned and shut out. Many were not welcome in the communities they came to serve. The story of one person is illustrative of the transformation of the role of legal aid in American communities over the past 50 years. It is the story of John Rosenberg of Prestonsburg, Kentucky. John was born in Germany in 1931. As a 7-year-old, he watched with his family as Nazis burned his synagogue's sacred scrolls and then ravaged the synagogue itself on Kristallnacht. His family took refuge in Holland and eventually made it to the United States. He became an Eagle Scout. He went to college at Duke and law school at the University of North Carolina. He served in the Air Force. He worked in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. And then he moved to Eastern Kentucky to open a legal aid office, the Appalachian Research and Defense Fund, or AppleRed, in the 1970s. When he arrived, he was, according to a profile in 1997 in the New York Times Magazine, labeled a radical, a communist, and a glorifier of the poor. Landlords refused to rent him office space. The County Bar Association wrote to Washington urging that federal funds for AppleRed be withdrawn. An article in the Kentucky Bar Journal mocked AppleRed as a propaganda organization. But John did what legal aid lawyers do. He threw himself into the service of his community. Despite the criticism of him, he took on coal companies over safety and environmental issues, the federal and state governments over benefits programs, banks to stop foreclosures, housing authorities to block evictions, and a public school district that charged children for their books. He worked with other community organizations. He found ways to work with the bar associations. And eventually, people realized that John Rosenberg was making their community better. They realized that Eastern Kentucky was a better place to live because of John Rosenberg. He rose to leadership positions in the county and state bar associations. He delivered the Law Day speech at the state capitol building. Just last month, the city of Prestonsburg dedicated Rosenberg Square in their downtown in honor of John and his wife Jean, in recognition of all they have done for their community. And at the University of Kentucky's most recent commencement, John received, at the age of 92, an honorary doctorate in humane letters in recognition of all that he has done for his state. John is here. John, would you please stand? John Rosenberg, you are an American hero. You, John Rosenberg, represent the best of our country's values. And today, as we mark the golden anniversary of the Legal Services Corporation, you stand as a representative of the tens of thousands of legal aid lawyers who, over the last 50 years, have been responsible for realizing the vision of a nationwide network of community-based legal aid organizations providing, in the words of the United States Congress, equal access to the system of justice in our nation for individuals who seek redress of grievances. We celebrate today the generations of legal aid lawyers whose hard work and selfless service to millions and millions of clients has proven the wisdom of the vision that launched the Legal Services Corporation. You are all American heroes. This is your day. On behalf of a grateful nation, thank you.